Hello, Bodhisattvas. So, when you notice that attention is caught up in, entangled, glued to the activity of thinking, you can notice that and then move attention to something different. Breathing, let's say. The sensations of breathing. You can kind of decide, right? Like, where do you want to observe the sensations of breathing? You want to observe them at the tip of the nose. You want to observe them in your abdominal breathing, in the movement and pressure that is happening through the diaphragm. Or do you want to notice it in your lungs? There's some choices there. There are different targets of attention. Or you can move it elsewhere, like I said. You can move it to hearing sounds or feeling body sensations other than breathing. This is basic mindfulness practice, and I guess, sometimes people will say all the benefits of mindfulness practice, and one of them is increased concentration. Well, I guess if you learn to notice when attention strays, goes somewhere that you don't desire, and you can actually get a feel for what attention is, and then you can redirect it and bring it back to your desired target. This should enhance concentration. Like, say you were reading a book and you get distracted, you notice that attention is getting distracted, then you can bring it back to reading. Like that. It's not so easy to explain why attention gets so caught up in thinking. You might maybe our thoughts are so interesting, but then often they're not that interesting. They're kind of repetitive or redundant or annoying even, You think thoughts you don't want to think, and still you can't get rid of them. Strange. I guess some evolutionary biologist might say, like, oh, okay, well, the mind has evolved to get interested in what moves and also in novelty. Yeah, I suppose so. It's like, if you have dinner at a sports bar, it's kind of difficult to take your eyes off the screen, right? It's like, even though you are committed to being there with the person you have dinner with, it's like, we all had that experience, and then you kind of have to say, like, well, I'm really going to stay engaged with this, and don't pay attention to that screen. And some people are capable of that. Some people are not really not. I don't know what the intention of a sports bar is really. It's like it's for some people to watch the game, but is it to destroy relationships or I don't know. The person who is sitting with their back to the screen can always feel superior. What's your problem? Anyway. I think there's more to it than just being interested in what moves or what's new. My teacher used to ask the question, if it's so easy to bring attention to breathing, the sensations of breathing, I would say, for a short period of time, and everybody can do it. Right? It's like I say to you, please bring attention to the sensations of breathing in your belly right now, and then you can take your attention and bring it there. It's not hard. So why, if something is so easy to do for a short period of time, why is it so difficult to do it continuously? This is a pretty profound question. And the answer we could give is that we, for some reason, maybe we'll just leave that open for now, but for some reason we need the continuity of thinking. My take on it has become is that each thought, when you think a thought, it's not just about the content that that thought brings. Thinking can bring all kinds of contents. It can bring contents from the past. It can bring contents from an anticipated or imagined future. It can bring abstract content, abstract concepts. It can bring, logical conclusions and all those functions of our thinking. It can bring judgment. Whatever the content of your thought is, there is the sense of a thinker who's thinking the thought. That be you, or I am thinking the thought. So a sense of self is co-produced with each thought. And so I would say the continuity of thought actually brings with it the impression of a continuity of self, a continuity of a thinker, which we identify with as ourself, the one who is doing the thinking. This is a pretty important turning point in anybody's practice. And you can check in with yourself where you are with this. Do you have the sense that you are your thoughts? That you are the thinker who's thinking thoughts? Is this your sense of self? One of the advantages of sitting zazen is that this sense of being a thinker of thoughts gets kind of, what do you want to say? How do you want to call that? It erodes. Because you realize at some point that you are not the author of your thoughts. your thoughts kind of just come in the door. Even when you don't want to think, like you want to not be an author of thoughts, they come anyway. So let's just say it erodes, but it doesn't mean it completely goes away. At least you start to doubt whether this is really yourself, whether you can really think of the stream of thoughts, that narrative, as yourself. I have had people say to me, it's like, I realized I am not my thoughts. And I say, okay, good. Go on. Another thing that I observe when I talk to people about this territory is, inevitably in zazen, you come to a point where you notice the gap between thoughts. There is a time where there's no thinking. It may not be very long, but it's there. Right? Like just by doing this practice of noticing attention, being entangled with thinking, taking it, bringing it to your breathing, there's a moment in which you're not really producing no thought is being produced. Not for very long maybe, but you're not dying in that moment. You're not disappearing. Your life doesn't collapse. So clearly, there's a different kind of continuity. There's a continuity of thought. When it gets interrupted, well, what's there? What are you in that space, that gap between thoughts? And this may have not happened to you. Maybe this is not a fear you've had, but I have talked to people who feel a fear of an abyss that opens up there when the continuity of thought is interrupted. So there's a craving for, some kind of craving for continuity. A kind of self-assurance. I don't think this is conscious at all. This is just something that happens. But when you are driven into a moment of disruption of that continuity, you may then notice how important that is for you, measured by the fear that arises. I think that this also doesn't fully explain our addiction to thought. I don't know Eastern philosophy as well as I know Western philosophy, and I don't know Western philosophy all that well either, compared to some people. But my impression is that one of the underlying motivations for the ancient Greek philosophers was to develop rationality as a counterweight to the passions. I don't know if you have any sense of the Homeric epics, but those folks, they are driven by passion. The passion comes and takes you over, and then it determines your action. You're like, you must kill this person because the rage comes and tells you so. And there's a promise in developing logos, what we would call rationality, I guess. There's a promise in developing rationality as a way to control that. I suppose, when people nowadays, many centuries later, are questioning our overly rational culture and call into question rationality, there'll always be people it's like, oh, beware, all those things that can happen when you lose grip. That is that idea that we need to hold ourselves and the world in a firm grip, conceptual grip, and logical reasoning, because otherwise you'll just be, you'll go insane. You'll be taken over by some other thing that is out of your control. Now, I think we have actually, as human beings, we have developed quite a bit since those times. And so I don't think that, I can't go into that, why I think that, but I think that's actually not that great of a danger. One idea that I have to say, like if I reflect on like what are the influential ideas in my life, one of the things that has really changed my life is when I heard the idea that anxiety is an expression of uncertainty. It just blew my mind. Now, I just want to say as an aside, maybe that's not true. Maybe that's not the full story of anxiety, but hear me out. Anxiety is an expression of uncertainty. When this hit me, I realized, anxiety is not a pathology. It's not really something to medicate or get rid of. It's an expression of an existential fact. You cannot get rid of uncertainty. At every moment of your existence, it's uncertain what will happen next. I mean, to a certain degree, in certain situations like right now, it doesn't matter, because it doesn't matter what I say next. But you don't know what it is. For bigger things, it feels more existential, like we don't know if we're going to live. Sometimes I think historical events are so dramatic is because within a very short time, something very dramatic changed. I remember, I lived in Germany when when the wall came down, and it's like masses of people in East Germany were just walking across the border. Something that was rigid and stable for 50 years. Is that true? 40 years. Rigid and stable for 40 years. Within a very short period of time, it changed not just Germany, but Europe, the world. This antagonism of the Cold War transformed into something else. And nobody predicted that. Nobody. Nobody said, oh, we will see that's going to happen. Anyway, uncertainty. Now another sentence that I heard fairly recently, someone said, half of life is loss. It's true, if not more. In each moment, the moment you just lived is lost. You get another moment, but then this one is lost. But in addition, in each moment, I spoke about attention the other day, in each moment, you're going to be focused on something. And you don't actualize all the other possibilities. I mean, we're sitting here, and you have plenty of other opportunities to spend your time. I guess that explains why at certain times during Sesshin there is doubt or regret. Why did I sign up for this? Or what am I doing here? Because there's a lot in the actualization of this moment. A vast array of possibilities are lost. So I don't even know if it's only half of life that's lost. Maybe it's 99%. If your mind is of a kind of melancholic tendency, you can just spend your life grieving. And that wouldn't be inadequate. That would just be like, I didn't do this and I didn't do that, and I wish I could have done this differently, and these precious things in my life are now gone, and this was taken away from me, and in the end I will die. I always thought, grief is maybe about something, but I went through a period of deep grief in my life, and it always felt like it was about something rather concrete. But I realize now it's like it can be triggered by little things that happen all the time, like a little loss will remind you of a big loss, and there's just losses everywhere. If you tune your mind to it, that said, it might be healthy to tune your mind away, your attention away from all that loss, because you get a certain kind of outlook on life if you tune yourself to the loss, instead of the newness and development that comes as the other side of loss. What I want to say here is, though, that my sense is that we can employ thinking as a defense against those existential facts and feelings. I think those existential facts come to us as feeling. And I don't mean as emotion, like the Greeks maybe wanted to have control of the passions. I think Buddhist thought is actually looking more at existential feelings. This isn't particularly explicit, but anyway, let me say a little bit more. The fact that life is uncertain, right? In Buddhist thought, you would speak of impermanence, and impermanence just means there's no stability. Now, change is not a problem if we don't crave stability. But if we do crave stability, if we want to count on something, then change is a problem, and that's when you call it impermanence. Impermanence. It's not permanent. Uncertainty falls into that kind of territory, and depending of your makeup or how you feel yourself, this is a truth about our existence, that there is this uncertainty, this unpredictability, this impermanence, this changing of everything all the time. And there may not be a full-blown anxiety about this, but there's an underlying kind of existential anxiety. And we defend against it. Some people are more past-oriented. They're nostalgic, or they live with regret, or, how the present isn't as good as the past was, or how the past could have been different, and if it was, then if it had been different, then the present would be different now, and I wish. But some people are very future-oriented, and they do a lot of planning for the future, because the present isn't good enough, so hopefully the future will, bring what the present is lacking. And we're different in that regard, but, you could use your thinking mind for a lot of anticipatory planning and calculating and strategizing to control that, get that uncertainty under control. I want to encourage you, depending on what kind of thinking you're doing, or are you doing the thinking? What kind of thinking you're encountering? What it is underneath it that is being held at bay by your thinking. Let me say why, because what kind of thinking you're doing. There's a certain ambiguity with regard to agency in our thinking. Are we doing the thinking, or is the thinking happening to us? I think there's a lot of ambiguity. There is the arising of thought that is not really initiated by us. But once it's arisen, there's awareness, noticing what has arisen, and then you can relate to that. Awareness relates to that, and then it sort of functions as an editor. It's like, maybe some thought arises and you're like, oh, really? You question it, you modify it, you conclude from it, and then there's another thought that arises and you relate to that. And so a stream of thought comes out of that. So there's some agency. It's a little bit like breathing. You are not really the agent of your breathing, but you participate in the quality of your breathing. You can form intentions in relationship to the breathing that your organism is just presenting to you. You can, feel it and see how it, you can make it deeper. You can change where it goes, right? So there's some agency. But if you wanted to stop breathing, you couldn't. It would just happen automatically. And I think it's similar with thinking. It just happens. But there is a participation with it that has a certain agency or intentionality in it. So I think we're defending, with our thinking, we have a tendency to defend against uncertainty and change. The two fundamental ideas or observations from which Buddhism arises is interdependence and impermanence. And those two brought together receive the name emptiness. Right? Emptiness is, if you want to define it intellectually, it's interdependence and impermanence. And those two, interdependence and impermanence, are two sides of the same coin. If everything is related to everything, influences everything, that produces change. And when change is produced, that will affect something, and then that will change in accord with what changed here, that will change. When this changes, that changes. Interdependence and change are basically two expressions of the same situation, called emptiness. And this aspect of interdependence is also really disturbing. Change is disturbing for us, and interdependence is disturbing too. Sounds like a cool thing, right? Everything is related to everything. How cool. It is kind of cool until it affects you in a way that you don't want. And when that happens, you are experiencing dependency or powerlessness. It's just happening to you, and there's nothing you can do about it, seemingly. Or maybe you can do a little bit, but it's not enough. We had this really intense wind, right? And Killian was standing outside, experiencing that wind. Well, we're sitting in here, really cozy. It's kind of nice and warm in here. It's really like to experience the weather from behind a window can be really romantic. Like, oh, look at this weather. It's blowing around leaves. But if you're homeless, it's different. It's very different. There's nothing romantic about that storm. It's really ripping the life out of you. If you spend, I have, in certain situations, if you spend an extended amount of time in a powerful wind, it takes your chi away. It's that forceful. So, if you're exposed to interdependence, like the wind, the product of interdependence, and it affects you, it can be deadly. So I'm just saying this to make us feel is like there's a strong desire for us to establish control. We do not want to be dependent and powerless. I recently spoke with someone about judgmental thought, and this was a good reminder for me. It's like, if things happen in the outside world, maybe, somebody's doing something next to you on the cushion. It's like shifting around or breathing loudly or, wearing a down jacket that makes like little synthetic noises. Nobody's doing that. Okay, good. There's your non-separation. Your non-separation means that those, in this case, noises, go right directly into you. I mean, they're not going into you. They are arising in your mind. And they can be thoroughly unwanted. For good reason or neurotic reasons. Doesn't matter. For my analysis, it's just unwanted. Now, multiply this by every person that is in our environment is doing their thing. The society as a whole is doing strange things. And it's all not in our control. So if you are powerless vis-a-vis, what can we say? Most things in the world, most important things in the world are outside of your control. The one thing your mind can do is judge it. Like inside your mind, you can have control over it. You can say like, how stupid is that? Or, this really shouldn't have. If this person was a good person, they wouldn't do it. Or, like whatever your style of judgment is. You just kind of like, you can really have at it. And for that moment, in which you like lay down the law or say how it should be, you have a sense of control. But only in your mind. Or just when stuff happens to you that you feel you don't deserve, you can like really complain, like, I don't deserve this. Yeah, from a certain point of view, maybe that's true, but as we've all observed, life isn't just. This is sort of like the dark side of interdependence, right? That we don't think about in, like when we think about it in fluffy terms, it's like all beings are interdependent with each other. How nice. So, what I'm saying is that underneath your thinking, there are existential facts and disturbances that the thinking seems to me like is a defense against. Because it creates the illusion of control, or it creates the illusion of certainty. If you do enough planning, you'll know how the future will unfold. If you do enough judging, somebody must read your mind and, give up their wrong ways. In addition, I would say, once thinking is really firmly established as a habit, it actually pulls you out of your body. It creates, to various degrees, disembodiment. And again, embodiment is such a wonderful word. It's like, we'll all want to be embodied. Not sure that's true, because to be fully embodied it means to be willing and open to feel everything you're feeling. And when you're disembodied, you do not have to feel everything full on. You feel certain things just as a shadow. You feel the despair and distress that you've experienced as a child. You just feel it as a kind of shadowy presence in yourself. You're not needing to get it into the foreground. You'll just, to think about it is safer than to feel it. Whatever hurt was created. So for many of us, being trained in thinking and not in feeling, like you go to school not to learn how to feel, you go to school to learn how to think, most people end up locating themselves in this head-shoulder triangle. And if you ask them, where are you? They'll say I'm between my ears or behind my eyes. And there's a certain barrier between this being that lives in the head and this body that is doing the feeling. And it separates you from a lot of delight and pleasure in life, but it protects you from the bad stuff. And that's its function. And so we can appreciate that. You can stop scolding yourself for being disembodied. You could say, the function of this disembodiment, to whatever degree, is to protect against very, very disturbing felt intensities. And so the only way to become more embodied is to develop what I called, in the Sesshin I'll call it, gentle fearlessness. I'm convinced you are not going to will yourself into freedom from your thinking. It's like your thinking will calm down to the degree that it doesn't have to perform the function anymore to protect you against discontinuity, uncertainty, powerlessness, and pain. There's always applied thinking. You have a problem, you think it through, you analyze something. That we're not talking about that. We're talking about the thinking that you do compulsively as a defense. Non-consciously you're doing that, but the thinking acts non-consciously as a defense against those kinds of things that I'm naming. There may be more. But those are the main ones, I think. The abyss of discontinuity. The anxiety with regard to uncertainty and instability. The defense against dependency and subsequent powerlessness. And just plain out in painful intensity. Sitting, the immovability of zazen, like just sitting here. And the determination, the stability of the body, of the posture. That's why, we set up the posture as stable. You are inviting, whether you know it or not. I'm telling you now that that's what you're doing. You're inviting those disturbing existential feelings. And little by little, they get to you. And you, little by little, you open up to them. And as you're allowing them, thinking can calm down. Investigate this. And maybe prime yourself with this intention of gentle fearlessness. To make space for all those disturbing feelings. The awareness that you are, that awareness that shows itself between thoughts, a new continuity. Oh, I'm not my thoughts. I'm the awareness that notices those thoughts. That can become a new continuity. And this new continuity of awareness is a whole lot more resilient than you think. But it takes practice. Sesshin is this way of sitting into that resilience. You use not moving, not scratching to set up the body in a way that you can discover the equivalent of the mind as being, not moving, not scratching. Receiving those very disturbing existential facts.